who is joining us today from New York as well. I'd love to hear a quick background about yourself to kick off, if that works.
Yeah, perfect. Logan, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited for our conversation. Uh, quick, 2-minute background. Longtime data leader. I kind of fell into data maybe 12, 13 years ago when data science started to become a thing. I had previously worked in finance on the business side, and then I was working as a developer at a technology company and already kind of doing a data job. I was like the only developer that knew what revenue meant and was doing most of the business work already, and it sort of naturally transitioned into a data role. And I grew a team there, went on to do some consulting, building data businesses inside Fortune 500 companies. And I was a data leader at Nielsen for a while, where I own the P&L of the Nielsen sports business, which focuses on data supporting sports sponsorship. And I went to a startup for a bit, and I am currently the founder of a company called Delivery Layer, which focuses on customer-facing data applications. So this is when you have data that you need your customers to log in to like a web application to see charts and graphs, or they have developers that need to get your data via an API. There are a lot of permissions and other things that are really important for those types of systems. And so a delivery layer builds those systems. And then I also have a program that I recently launched called Top Data People, which is taking all of my learnings from the years managing a couple hundred data people and having sort of a professional development program to help data people be more impactful at their jobs.
Okay. Wow. Very cool. So it sounds like you've covered like the whole spectrum from developer, Fortune 500s, startups, education side, have done it all. But you mentioned you fell into data. So that kind of initial developer role that got your whole journey started, and I guess shaped a large part of your professional life. I'm curious just to learn a little bit more about like what that actually means of, hey, I fell into this data field and now a decade later, I'm still in it and loving it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'd love to chat about that. So I studied statistics in school. I studied operations research. Back before data was as established of an option for a career as it is now. Nowadays, people already know they want to get into data. When I was studying data, I didn't even know that I wanted to get into data. And so I went into finance for a couple of years. And while I was there, this was sort of, I call it the beginning of Web 2.0. This is like 2008, 9. And I just felt really strongly that most of the interesting things that were going to get done in my lifetime were going to be because of technology. It wasn't going to be like the next hedge fund in a financial company that was going to totally change the world. And so I decided to go and quit my finance job and start a tech company that crashed and burned. But I taught myself web programming, and I felt very strongly that if I could have both the business skills as well as technical skills, that was going to be a great foundation for my career, regardless of where I wanted to take it. And so when that startup crashed and burned, I went to a tech company and said, you know what, let me learn from a really strong technology organization how to be, I taught myself the basics, but why don't I learn from a really strong technology organization how to do more than the basics? And then this whole data career came along where it was that combination of the things that I really cared about, which was the business and the technical side. And so I naturally fell into it.
Okay. Got it. Very nice. And then, so you went from, I guess, that starting role at a startup, smaller organization, and then over to the Fortune 500 side at Nielsen, which is a massive company. So what was that transition like, going from a startup type data person to a large organization and owning some P&L for products there?
Yeah. So it was super interesting. I had a stop in the middle. So I was at the startup for a little while. I grew a team there. And then after that, I was a consultant who was working inside Fortune 500 companies building products or helping their teams to develop new products, sort of like innovation consulting focused on data. And was a crucial experience for me, because going from, and even my financial job that I worked at was more of like a startup-y type company, and just the cultural difference between a small startup and how you operated a small startup versus a huge company, it's very different. And so in that consulting job in the middle, I had this amazing opportunity to essentially lead like 15, 20 different teams across different businesses that were working on these types of problems. And so I got exposed very quickly to, number one, just from a leadership perspective, how do I operate as a leader? How do I lead people working on data products and different challenging political, technical, organizational dynamics? That was great learning. And it also got me a lot of exposure to how things work or don't work oftentimes inside big companies. So that was key. And then when I left consulting and wanted to own a little bit more of the end result and be in the mix of the decision making, that experience was a crucial bridge towards what I ended up doing at Nielsen, because I was able to take the sense of urgency to get things done, the focus on shipping, the like real customer obsession that I got from my startup experience, but also understand enough how to navigate a big company that I could make it work when I was leading teams inside that big company.
Right. Very cool. Yeah, we feel it all the time, the kind of contrast between startup world versus enterprise world. Like when we hear urgent from some of our customers' clients, like urgent could mean 2 quarters from now. And like in the startup world, it's like urgent means like 8 hours, 2 hours, like we got to get this done ASAP. And that was a big kind of adjustment period that I think I went through from a different lens of a startup selling to enterprises versus a role in both. So I can only imagine going from kind of that startup pace to the enterprise, that's bigger, of course, P&L, budget, probably responsibility. But that pace, I imagine, just moves so differently. And was that part of the reason you went back to this startup world with a delivery layer and top data people? Or I'm curious what kind of brought you back to this startup entrepreneurship world?
So I liked my big company leadership job. I ended up going to, I had a brief stint at a company leading data for sort of like a unicorn data startup that focused in like the e-commerce space. I did that for a couple months, and then they restructured and I decided to leave. And at that point I was like, do I go after another data leadership job, or do I go, and I've had this idea for delivery layer for a while, and just my personal situation was like, previously when I had the idea for delivery layer, it wasn't the best timing, and then I suddenly find myself in much better timing. But I actually really liked being a data leader at a big company. And interestingly, I think what's unappreciated by many people is that most of the most interesting data jobs are going to be at big companies, because that's who has the most data problems, that's who has the most data, and that's where the delta of making a change with data has the biggest impact. I mean, if you improve a $3 million business by 10%, you've added $300,000. If you improve a $3 billion business by 10%, you've suddenly added a lot more impact as a data person. So the fact that you have this platform to work from with a big company, I think is an underappreciated element of where a lot of the value from data can come from.
Interesting. Yeah, I completely agree, because I guess large enterprises, the impact that you're able to have is just 10x, 20x, just based on that kind of market cap and size. And are there any specific data projects that you've worked on, or kind of stories you can tell where you've driven and gone through and kind of that result has been created to that larger magnitude, or any kind of story of how you've used data to ultimately create impact? I'm curious from any of those experiences, any ones that you're interested in highlighting.
Sure. Let's see. I mean, there's a lot of them. I think I'll share one story. So when I was at Nielsen, one of the big things that we did was sort of transform the sports business with AI. So, and this is pre-Gen AI days. And so so what we used to do is we would analyze every second of professional sports, essentially, that was broadcast across the world. And then we'd identify what brands were on the screen that were sponsors within the sports broadcast. And then we'd put a value on that compared to what it would normally cost to buy commercial space in that broadcast. So if you're a team or a brand trying to do a sponsorship deal, that's really important data to understand the value of what you're getting versus what you're paying for. And Nielsen is the premier provider of that data for global sports organizations across the world. And for a long time, that data was created primarily manually. We had teams of people that were doing data entry, going second by second across sports broadcasts, matching logos together. And so my big task in that business was to replace that with a computer vision system. And obviously, and like, we bought a company and we integrated had them build technology, but that was similar to the technology that they used to have to support our use case. So it was like a big project. Obviously, I was leading it. I wasn't doing a lot of the hands-on programming work, but it was this massive initiative, and it was pretty successful. So that was like a real, transform a business with AI moment.
Oh, wow. So you completely replaced, I guess, that manual data entry with this new computer vision startup. So you're able to, I guess, collect and then analyze that data so much faster that ultimately is driving what outcome then? Is it prices for sponsors, or what is that?
Well, mostly it was speed and time to market, time, because doing a lot of manual work on the if imagine how much time it takes to manually check every single second of every single game for every single league in the world. It's a lot. And so our ability to speed that up allowed us to get data to our customers a lot faster.
Okay.
And that makes a huge difference in this new world. It also sort of opened up our ability to analyze social media in a way that we weren't able to do before. And social media, obviously, from a sponsorship perspective, plays such a big role. And so there was a lot that the business kind of couldn't do because we were limited by this blocker. And then through data and technology, we were able to take that blocker away.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, and I can only imagine the use cases now, like the social media, for one, is the amount of video, other things that the similar technology could be applied to, just as this kind of, I guess, the market changes and additional use cases pop up. But yeah, that's a great story, and thanks for sharing it there. And then switching gears a little bit, I'm curious on kind of that problem set you mentioned, as well as you've seen different evolution of problems throughout your data career. What are some of the big ones that have lasted from 5-10 years ago that you still see today?
Yeah, so I think that data people live in problems, right? And not in a bad way. Like, the way that I see it is that the whole purpose of data people is to solve tough problems. Because if the problem was easy or obvious, you wouldn't actually need data people. Anybody could do it. And so as data people, you're always dealing with tough problems. I think that one of the things, and we're both kind of in this world of me through the top data person stuff that I do, and you through data logs, of trying to think through not just like from a having a data team side, but how effective is your data team? How much value are they driving? I think that those kinds of problems, because I think nowadays a lot of companies see value or know that they can get value from data. And I think now the question is, how do data teams most effectively deliver that? And those, I think, are really interesting problems that are still, that to a certain extent are timeless, but are really important right now.
Right. And how do you assess that value metric if you're a leader on a data team, or if you have multiple teams below you?
Well, there's a joke. I remember when I was interviewing for my previous job that I was like, it's sort of like a meme that data people can judge the effectiveness of everyone else with data, but when you try to turn data back to the data team, it's like very tough. And the way that I think about it is a little bit of a virtuous cycle where you've got people in the business that are winning because of data, and then you've got more excitement around using data more effectively that leads to more people using data, that leads to more impact from data. Because data as a role only delivers value through other teams mostly. It's not about the data. It's like data can help improve the number of signups, or data can help increase your sales, but your marketing team is the one that's on the hook for the sign-up number. Your sales team is the one that's on the hook for sales. Data doesn't generally sign up to hit a number or the data leader gets fired. And so as a result, I'm a big believer that as data teams, you're there to support the people whose jobs are on the line to hit that number and to help them effectively get there. And so the best way that I see judging data teams is, are those people that you are supposed to be helping, are they feeling like you are one of the big reasons that they're able to be successful?
Right. Yeah, and I feel like through a lot of large enterprises that we work with at Data Logs, where it's a model where there's a central data team almost acting as like an internal consultant, where they're solving problems for different business stakeholders. And then ultimately, of course, each project has its own KPIs and success. And then the flip side that we see a lot as well is kind of these hub and spoke data teams, where that central team is acting as an enabler for anyone to solve use cases that they want. So if you're building out your gold certified views in Snowflake that any sales marketing person can use to drive their own revenue insights, how do you keep enabling that? And that ultimate measurement of value, then it becomes a question mark. Is it how well that business team used our data? Is it, hey, we have uptime 99.9% of the time and it's accurate, reliable data? But yeah, I guess going back to a question for you on kind of models of data teams that you've seen and you've worked with, have you seen any be particularly successful, and ones that are kind of your go-to if, hey, I'm building a team from scratch at a Fortune 2000, this is the ideal way that I would want to set it up, and I would advise fellow data executives to follow?
Sure. I generally like the hub and spoke model versus the purely centralized team model. And the reason that I like that is because I see successful data work as needing that combination of technical plus business skills and business acumen. And when you have a centralized team, one of the challenges is that you don't get to develop the depth of business understanding and connection to a team when you just sort of like pick items off of a queue that could be for everyone, as opposed to if you are specifically focused on one specific team that has a certain set of goals, you can deeply understand those goals and develop relationships with the people on the team and understand more about what they're trying to accomplish and be better positioned to help them. So I generally like that model over centralized, but I think a big part of all of these things is we like to think that the choice, the strategic choice matters more than the execution. And I am not so sure that that is true. I think a very well executed centralized data team can be highly effective. A very well executed hub and spoke model can be effective, and a poorly executed one is going to be way worse than a well executed other one. So like a lot of these things, it's less about the thing itself and more about how you do it.
Right. Yeah, and we see the same things where there's so many different factors from what's the skill of the business users. Are they super technical where they're writing, building out their own notebooks? Or are they BI users? Or is it just, hey, we want to download things, go to Excel and copy paste, screenshot into a PowerPoint? There's so many different models of people, company sizes, problems to solve. I agree with you. There's never a one size fits all, and definitely the consulting approach of let's assess the environment, come up with, hey, what makes sense here, then ultimately execute a model that works for that given organization or company. And a different question along kind of a similar thread is, so a problem we see at data logs all the time, and what we really focus on solving is around analytics and BI sprawl. So with that hub and spoke model, as you get more and more people creating similar reports, dashboards, things failing, how have you seen large organizations kind of manage that analytics and BI sprawl piece in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen I've seen the spectrum. Truthfully, most people don't handle it, right? They just like live with it. And then the question is, like, how do you navigate? Because a lot depends on how far along the problem you are and how long you've let it fester. Like, have you ever deleted a dashboard, or do you have every dashboard that every person has ever used? Do you look at any usage statistics? If something hasn't been used in 2 years, do you turn it off? Or do you still have it around, and then when someone searches for it, they hit it and they don't know if it's accurate or not? Like, so I generally see that teams coalesce around a couple of different primary dashboards that they'll use, and then you have people in the organization that will use different dashboards, and then if they leave, those dashboards are just sort of like in the abyss, and it's a pain. It's no surprise that you're having success as a company dealing with this, because every senior data leader deals with some flavor of this being a problem.
Right. Yeah, and what we're seeing is, like, as soon as there's a migration or assessment or some kind of trigger to go, hey, what exists in our BI environment? That's where I think really the light shined on, how do we end up with 85% of our reports, dashboards unused? Our record so far of what we've identified is we found a single table duplicated in Power BI over 1,800 times at an organization where you're repaying that compute each time it's refreshed. And so problems like that just continue to arise. But I'm curious on the delivery layer side, if there's any specific story or kind of problem pain point that drove you to start delivery layer.
Yeah, definitely there is. Although I do want to double down on that comment that you said that there's normally like some sort of thing happening. One of the interesting things about business that I think is unappreciated by a lot of data people is that actually, when you're a business leader making decisions, you are okay with problems. Like, actually, there are going to be a lot of problems in your business, and these can even be obvious problems. You're like, we're doing this the wrong way. It's like, yes, we are doing this the wrong way, because you only have so many shots to solve problems across everything. You only have so many resources. And so it's less of like, your job is less of like a firefighter where you have to put out every fire, and more of like a forest ranger where you're like, okay, here are the 30 fires that are going on, and these are the 5 that really matter. And so it's no surprise that a lot of what you're talking about, where you get pulled in, where there's a priority, you need to do some migration, and this is when you need to clean up what was otherwise a very messy situation. It's kind of similar for delivery layer. So delivery layer is, and I face this problem in multiple different companies, where the world of data is mostly focused on supporting internal decision making. And so all of the tools in the modern data stack work great as long as your data stays inside of your company. But the minute that your data needs to leave your company, there are a lot of assumptions around usability and packaging of your data and permissions and entitlements and a whole bunch of other things that were true internally that aren't true externally. So, for example, for internal tools, there's an expectation that that dashboards are for execs to look at, and if data teams want to look at the data, they can run a SQL query. Well, what about when you're putting your data externally? You can't give SQL access. If Coke and Pepsi want to log into the same website, see different data, you can't just give them both SQL access to the same database. They're going to be able to see each other's data, right? So there's a whole bunch of things for external facing data that don't apply for internal facing data. So I dealt with this in multiple companies. Obviously, Nielsen has so much data that we build products on. So packaging our data into products and then being able to go sell that as, the business. And that's where so I've had a lot of exposure to this problem, and Delivery Layer is there to solve it. And just for some context, Delivery Layer is software, but Delivery Layer, the company, is sort of like a mix of software and services where because unlike data logs where you probably want to stay on top of your data usage, generally people want an application or want an API, and then they want it to work. They're generally not looking to continue building it forever. Sometimes they are, but so for us, it's like we have the software, but also customers generally want Delivery Layer to help them implement the software. And so we do that as well. We're kind of like our own consulting implementers. So that's the story behind Delivery Layer, and I happy to dive in more.
Yeah, no, thanks for walking me through that. I feel like everyone has these kind of problems they see, but very few people take action to actually start solving them in the market. And then that services approach you mentioned, I think DBT had the same thing where they were a consulting firm first and then turned into this product company. And that model seems to work very well for startups as they scale and grow. It's funny, for data logs, we started with the mindset of, hey, we want to only be focused on product. We don't want to have any services. But then as we got larger customers, kind of more complex use cases for our problems, then people started saying, hey, well, can you give us some people to actually run data logs and help us execute the cleanup, do some of these migration efforts as part of it? And so we've seen kind of the flip side of starting with the goal of product only, and now more and more services revenue come up to us. But yeah, I'd say overall kind of a similar journey that we've been through there.
Yeah, I think that the vision of hands-off enterprise SaaS, like for startups where you only sell the software and you don't actually implement it, is not oftentimes viable at big companies. Like they need people helping them. And so I feel this is more of a startup topic than a data topic in particular, but I feel like it's just a waste and it's wrong that you have all these customers that are getting set up to fail because you're not there to make sure that they're successful with your software. It's just not a good outcome. So I'm Delivery Layer is a bootstrap company, which is probably also why I've been able to do a little bit unconventional things like start a professional development program for data people. And so I've never been against the services. I think that ultimately that is what is the best end result for customers. And I think that more people should be thinking about that as the number one priority.
Right. Yeah, it's I guess all about creating value, whether it's startup, data team, or I guess really any kind of role. That's
Sure.
in the day what's measured. And then on top data people, so that's your audience, your customers, data executives, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Please?
Great question. So my marketing, so I'll give the whole background. I'll give the founding story of this as well. So my marketing strategy for Delivery Layer was to talk about data stuff on LinkedIn. And I decided to go more of like that type of like influencer marketing because my last two roles, like at Nielsen, the sports business is actually the closest business to the influencer market because it's essentially sponsorship, and most of the largest influencers in the world are sports figures, and they're doing these very large sponsorship deals with big companies. So we were sort of in the mix of analyzing a lot of those, and then my next company also is very heavily involved in the sort of influencer space. And so I felt like, all right, there are not many data leaders who have managed hundreds of data people, had data P&Ls, done data businesses. There aren't that many people that talk about their experiences doing that on LinkedIn in a very authentic way. And so if I were to start doing that, I felt like I had a pretty reasonable chance at developing an audience that was going to be interested in those topics. Some small percentage of that audience would be a good fit for Delivery Layer. And when they had a problem that Delivery Layer solved, that they needed to get data outside of their company, they would reach out, and they would have a good sense of the kind of business that I'm running and the kind of way that I approach data work, because they will have seen me write a lot or go on podcasts like this where I explain about my philosophy on data and business. And I was reasonably successful with that over the last, year and a half-ish, to where I'd gone from no followers essentially to about 15,000. And I thought that the next stage, you deal with this all the time, I imagine. Also, one of the two things that you're supposed to do in business are, number one, you're supposed to focus, and number two, you're supposed to double down on what's working. And in this case, those two things veered in opposite directions, which was like, on the one hand, I was like, I should just be focused on Delivery Layer. But then on the other hand, it was like, well, I've developed this audience, and the thesis always, I actually don't put as much stock in just like generalized influencer content. I feel like it's the benefit that you get is a function of actually how much you help people. Like, if you're able to help people a lot, you get a lot of benefit. If you're just someone that people follow and think every once in a while says something smart, you don't get as much benefit. So I was like, I feel like I could really benefit people and data leaders and teams if I were to like share things in a lot more depth. And what would a program like that look like? And that's how I came up with this. Like, I started out like putting a course together, but it just was like way too much for one course. I was like, all right, it needs to be like a program where it was like a combination of both the content, where it's like, here, I've managed many people and seen a lot over the years. Here's what I've seen the top people do differently that made them so successful. And just like, there's a lot of stuff there. And so I decided to turn it into like a 6-month development program where there's a content piece, and then there's coaching. So like every 2 weeks we get on, we talk about how to implement the lessons, talk about situations that you're facing in your job that are challenging. And then you not only get advice on your situation, but you also hear a whole bunch of other people that are coming with challenges in their own job, and you get to learn through the experiences of others. One of the toughest parts about data work is actually most of it happens alone, because you're just working on a problem with an executive one-on-one. You don't get to see as much of the detail about what's happening behind the scenes with other people. So I thought that was like important to add in. And then a little bit of a online community. You can ask questions, you can answer questions. Teaching is a big part of learning. And I thought if I did this, it would really help a lot of people, and I could do it in the hours that I've set aside for my marketing time. And so let me do that. So that's where Top Data People came from.
Okay, very cool. And so it's been on a kind of like a cohort every 6 months. There's a new group of people, or you can join on
it's a rolling. It's rolling. So you come on, you're part of the program for 6 months, and then 6-month program is over.
Okay, got it. Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I feel like we're meeting all kinds of data leaders selling our software, but also from a personal level is like, how do I continue communicate, chat, understand the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis from a slightly different lens. But yeah, it sounds super exciting and amazing to see kind of, I guess, the two passions, diverge, but it sounds like it's all coming back together.
I mean, it's all data. It's all data in the end. And I think that I think it has to, like, there's a lot of overlap also with what you're working on at Data Logs, because I think there's this, there's a general theme in data that it's like more tools, right? Or more things. I think that are like more data and more. I think actually this idea of how do you help your data team be more effective, right? How do you focus? How do you get people doing more with the teams that they have, and having more business impact? I think that's going to be a big theme, and it's really important.
Right. Yeah, one of the, I guess, themes we're seeing as well in the market is consolidation. Is, hey, why do we have 6 different tools that do this? Now, we are another software tool to help consolidate, but that's the value that enterprise is ultimately receiving, is how do we actually consolidate, reduce, and ensure what we're producing is higher quality versus kind of endless quantity on data products.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up the time we have today, but thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it, and can't wait to share this out. And everyone should go follow Solomon Kahn on LinkedIn, and also check out the course.
All right. Logan, thank you so much. This has been great.
Awesome.